to believe that we're still in the middle of a global pandemic after all these months. I mean, I still remember, coming into the office today, what it was like, 18, 19 months ago when we were all kind of packing up. Everyone had a bit of a sort of a giddy school feel to it. Like this was going to be an extended March break because it was the week leading into at least Ontario March break for the school system here. And I thought this was just going to be like a sort of a 2 week thing. We'd have this thing under control, and then sort of by April 1st, we'd be back to normal. I was planning in-person events in April, and then of course we all know how that ended up turning out. It does feel like though we are entering into the new normal, whatever that looks like. We have vaccination rates, not just in Ontario, but across the country that are, I think exceeding what some people thought might have happened with vaccine hesitancy. So it's great to see that vaccine uptake, and that maybe there is actually a light at the end of the tunnel at some point, even if we do have to maybe wear masks for a little bit longer than we'd all like to. But what we're fortunate to have with this panel discussion is four members from across the country who I'll let introduce themselves in a moment. But their companies have been on the front lines of this, everything from the sort of med tech and vaccine space to essential service, in retail environments through to the more kind of industrial sector, and providing those critical things that keep the consumer goods in our country being built, and also keeping the heat and the lights on. So maybe with that, I'll let the panel introduce themselves, and also maybe just start off with a little bit of a reflection, looking back at some of the measures that your company has taken, and what were the ones that were most effective to instill confidence in both your workforce as well as the consumers that you interact with. So maybe Jeff, we'll start with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you. And just by way of introduction, I'm the president and CEO of Mosaic Forest Management. And let me start by acknowledging that I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish nations. Mosaic Forest Management is largest timberland producer in Canada. We supply over 50 mills in Canada and have a significant export business to countries in the Pacific Rim, Japan, South Korea, China, and the US. And there are about 2,000 people that work for and with us every day. So look, it was clearly a moment of truth for any leader that when the pandemic hit, back in that time, as you described, in March and April. We were certainly faced with a significant challenge. And I'll just give you three themes that I think were critical in the response. The first of which was clearly putting people first. There was a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and we didn't really understand the risk at the time, but people were scared, they were anxious, and they were concerned. And of course, we were businesses, and we operate our businesses, and we look to generate positive outcomes, not only financially, but for our communities. But at the end of the day, every business functions on the strength of its people. And so the first order of business really was, notwithstanding the fact that we didn't know a lot about what was going on with respect to the pandemic, is putting the people first. And so effectively sending folks home, putting people ahead of production, taking the appropriate precautions, and really ensuring that folks were safe, and then really ensuring that their well-being was taken care of. The second piece around it really was the communications piece. In the absence of communication, obviously anxieties rise dramatically. No one knew how things were going to play out. And so it was extraordinarily important to communicate early and often. And I know in our organization, I immediately, as things unfolded, held a town hall, and then did so all hands every week for quite a number of weeks before we slowed the cadence. And so that was an important element of ensuring that folks felt like they had the information that they needed and understood where the company was at, the precautions that we were taking, and what we thought the outlook was, which really leads me to the last piece around this, around transparency. And transparency doesn't mean necessarily that you're prognosticating. What was clear is that everything was unclear at the beginning of the pandemic. And it was really important from a credibility perspective, after assuring folks that their well-being was front and center, what we knew and what we did not know. Folks understood that, and we getting caught in the trap of setting dates around return to the office and how things ought to play out, particularly in the early days of the pandemic, was not credibility enhancing. And it was really, really important to say, what do I know? What don't I know? What do I think might happen? But here's the qualifications on it. And here's how we're going to work together to ensure that you are healthy and safe, and that we preserve and do everything that we can to ensure the survival of the business. So those are the three pieces: putting people first, communicating early and often, and the piece around transparency.
No, thanks for that, Jeff. And I mean, your point about knowing what you don't know really does speak again to my sort of reminiscing about what it was like at the start of this whole thing. Remember we all used to put our sleeves around our hands, before we touched a doorknob because we thought, something bad would happen right away. But it's amazing how much our collective epidemiological knowledge has evolved since that point. But maybe with that, I'll turn over to Michelle next.
Thanks very much, Mark. I'm Michelle George, and I'm the Vice President of Engineering and Storage and Transmission Operations for Enbridge at our gas utility in Ontario. And as part of my role, I led the pandemic crisis response team at Enbridge Gas. So this question definitely hits home for me. I think you'll probably hear similar themes from all of us, but I may focus a little on our response for our customers. So first and most important, safety is a core value at Enbridge, and focusing on safe and reliable operations was front and center for us as we responded to the pandemic. And I have to say, I am so proud of our employees who showed their incredible dedication to safety and to our 3.8 million customers every day. As an essential service and a critical energy infrastructure company, we plan for emergencies, we practice those plans, and we also have experience managing our operations through both small-scale local outages and large-scale emergencies like hurricanes, tornadoes, and more recently the BC wildfires and the Texas storms. So when the COVID-19 pandemic was declared, we immediately implemented our crisis management plans. We enacted our incident command structure, and that included two pieces: the centralized team for the enterprise-wide decision-making and also our local incident response teams for execution. We introduced a number of operational and procedural changes to keep people safe right away. So similar to Jeff, people who could work from home did. Those who couldn't work from home, so our field operations crews and our 24/7 control rooms or dispatch centers started following the new protocols that included hand washing stations, new PPE, the masks and the eye protection, the physical distancing, and then our daily health assessment app. But in addition to the protocols for physical safety, we also looked at tools to support mental health. So including wellness programs, various resources, and check-in surveys to see how people were doing. And I think it was really how we took care of our employees during this time of uncertainty that was really critical in instilling that confidence among them. We provided additional flexibility in work hours to accommodate caregiver responsibilities, and we doubled our emergency childcare benefits. So our goal was really to ensure we were doing everything we could as an organization to protect the public and our people while continuing to provide the energy people and businesses needed.
Great, thanks for that, Michelle. James, why don't we go over to you next for the J&J perspective?
Sure. So James Brody, I'm the general manager of the medical devices sector of the Canadian operations here in Canada. Leading the medical devices business means I also held a similar position Michelle did in terms of being the lead for our crisis management team as part of our business continuity plan. So again, very familiar subject. And I guess as context, beyond being one of the largest, most broadly based healthcare companies in Canada, our site, in particular the medical devices site that I oversee, is affiliated with a shared distribution center. So it just brought in a different lens of kind of distribution or supply chain to our mix beyond just the typical kind of head office based work that we do in Canada as well. So maybe later in the conversation, I can reflect a bit on that. I guess, some similar themes to what you've heard already. I mean, early in the pandemic, it was very much, as Jeff said, a people first orientation. And I'll add on to that, being a healthcare organization, we really wanted to follow the science and the evidence and the lead of public health officials in trying to communicate that to our teams. From a people first perspective, we really wanted to understand the fact that all of us, to varying degrees, were anxious in that period. There was a lot of unknowns, to Mark, your point. We knew very little about how quickly or how broadly this was going to disseminate, nor the implications to individual or community health. So reflecting on that first, I think, was key. But then again, that dual responsibility we felt on following the evidence and educating our employees on the evidence, we felt was critical as a healthcare organization, because not only did it quell anxiety within the ranks, it also allowed us to go out into the community in which we serve and families, et cetera, and try to dispel like a lot of the rhetoric that was happening through social media and things like that as well. And that was just kind of a dual responsibility that we had. I think during the mid stages, probably like everyone else who had sound business continuity plans in place and were following public health guidance, employee health and safety became the standard to follow. Working from home where we could. Our deliver or distribution functions obviously had to stay within the distribution center. So cohorting where we could, creating separation of our workforce on site, making sure we were masking, shielding, all the things that we're all very familiar with right now, but we did that right out of the gate. And probably most important, as Michelle said, the whole mental health angle as well for people on site, who we called our on-site superheroes, because they were working and driving and moving through the community in the midst of a pandemic that was very unknown to us, but as well the people who were figuring out how to work from home as well, and making sure that mental health and even ergonomic health, instead of working at a card table for 6 months, and the impact on your spine as an orthopedic company, we're very sensitive to that. So just making sure physical and mental health were at the forefront. And I guess kind of at the end, more recently is continuing to follow the science when it comes to vaccines, and making sure that our employees understand all the data behind vaccination, why it's important. And obviously we are a developer and distributor globally of one of the vaccine options. So I think that's congruent with our philosophy. But again, dispelling any of the mistruths around vaccine hesitancy, et cetera, we felt an obligation to do a lot of that work as well. But to Jeff's point, hyper communication throughout. I think we had 22 town halls as opposed to 1 a quarter last year, and just putting everything on the table was critical throughout the early, mid, and late stages as well.
Well, thanks a lot for that, James. And we're going to go to T next, but I just want to, first, give Tina a really big thank you on behalf of the Chamber Network for the work that she did, not just as a sort of co-chair of our COVID Recovery Council, but Tina was really in the trenches, with the Chamber staff and helping us to really develop like the nuts and bolts of the toolkits and the best practice that, we've been circulating out to, all of you, the members, for you that then cascade out to your small and medium-sized businesses. These toolkits, don't happen without a lot of work that goes into them, and I'd like to particularly acknowledge the work that Tina did to really make that a reality, and sharing a lot of the expertise and insights that she's developed from her business, and she's been able to talk a little bit about that experience. So Tina, over to you.
Great. Thank you, Mark. I spent way more time with you than I would have imagined at the beginning of this. But it's been a pleasure to work with you and with your team. So T&T Supermarkets is the business that I run. It's a 29-store grocery chain. We have stores in BC, Alberta, and Ontario. We employ over 5,000 colleagues across our network. I co-chair the COVID-19 Recovery Council, and I also spent time serving on the COVID-19 Procurement Council for Minister Anand in the early parts of 2020. As an essential service, we had the blessing and the curse for having to remain open the entire time during COVID, serving over 500,000 customers every week. And surely it was very hard. But we had, this is where I would say Canada's diversity has really benefited, certainly my business. And, I hope for future crises to come. We looked across the Pacific and took a lot of strokes when in Canada here we didn't know. And so we threw everything at and the kitchen sink at this issue. We had in masks, temp checks, store closures, the upgraded ventilation, duct cleaning, social distancing, contact tracing, the whole list. I mean, I think it was the industry's most aggressive response to COVID. And particularly on masks was the biggest win, was the most effective in terms of keeping cases down at the time we didn't have vaccines, and is the single most important thing that will persist. The combination of masks and vaccines has taken cases, dropped it down to near nothing. And so I would say that was most effective at the beginning, and these are the two things that will continue to persist. In terms of transparency, absolutely, I agree with that, with James and Jeff on that. I would say transparency to our customers was also very important, to have the visual cue that even when we declared every positive case that was happening in our stores, it absolutely had a financial impact, but in the long run, I think that was the right decision. It built trust amongst our customers, and we continue to do that today. And as soon as we could establish over 80% of our employee base were vaccinated, we shared that information too. So those being transparent with both colleagues and our customers was hugely important. And I think, lastly, what worked well was something we often overlook, which is our lunchrooms. Very much important to space out the tables and put in these clear partitions between tables. That was the only moment where people took off their masks while they were at work. And so if you controlled the lunchroom and then you had the masks in, and then months and months later, you had the vaccines. Today, this is very much T&T's in a retail environment, our new normal. And these are the three things that will persist amongst all of the things that we tried before.
No, thanks for that, Tina. And I think that's a good example of when you're trying to adapt the workspace and try to have some semblance of normal. I mean, that colleague socialization is critical, and enabling a lunchroom to still be a lunchroom. I know it sounds small, but for those of us who like that socialization element at work, it's absolutely critical to have it still be a hub, right, for folks to get together.
It's what people miss the most.
Yeah, exactly. So maybe if we can shift a little to talking about, what will be the biggest change to our ways of working that'll endure past, the end of the pandemic, dare I say those words, and are companies sufficiently prepared for that? I mean, Jeff, maybe I'll go to you first. I mean, you have folks that are in the office and you have folks that are in the field as well. So you have a bit of a unique perspective on this question.
Yeah, look, thanks for that, Mark. So the question is, will things change? Have they changed? The answer is absolutely yes, but not as much as people think. So let me just explain it there. Of course, so in settings that Tina described, in a manufacturing setting, in a shared accommodation setting, of course, we will continue to use the precautions and measures that have been identified to keep folks safe. The question and the piece that's really interesting going forward is, what about those situations where physical presence is effectively optional? In other words, you can do the work remotely. The question is, ought you to do the work remotely? And if so, to what degree? And here's the piece, I think. Clearly a lot of organizations have been able to relatively effectively, from an office perspective, work remotely. But at the end of the day, relationships still matter. And the reality is the overall effectiveness and ultimately productivity of those folks was in part dependent on the relationships that have been formed pre-pandemic. That alignment, that cultural inclusiveness, the way in which we do things around here, the connection between people is ultimately cemented and crystallized when people are able to get together in person. And the reality is, going forward, we operated reasonably well when everyone was virtual and everyone was a tile on a screen like we are here today. And of course, it works exceptionally well when people are together. What doesn't work so well is when some people are physically present and others are remote. We don't yet have the cost-effective technology that creates the inclusion of the folks that are participating remotely when you have a bunch of folks in the room. So this is a real challenge going forward. And the question is, are businesses sufficiently prepared? For those folks that have largely been working remotely and are looking to transition now or in the near future, say the new year, the answer is generally not. I don't know how many folks on this call have experienced a relative degree of new employees coming on board over the course of the last 18 months. Probably if you pulled the membership, it would be a relatively large number of people that have joined organizations over the last 18 months. We're not talking about the labor piece here, but there has been a certain amount of turnover for sure. And those new folk that are coming to the organization, how are they going to be coached and trained and mentored going forward? Are we sufficiently prepared for the new normal? The answer, I believe, is not yet, not really. Back to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. James, I know we've talked in the past about your kind of hybrid operation. Again, similarly, you have folks in the office and you have folks that are out, on the road. So, I mean, what does it look like for your workforce?
Yeah, I mean, I'll maybe just start where Jeff left off and the new employees. So I'll speak globally as opposed to locally because I have the stat and it's bigger. You know, J&J has welcomed 16,000 new partners across the globe. And, you know, while I've lived and worked in J&J for 25 years, I've established credibility, connections, all the things that Jeff was talking about that are critical to success in advancing your business objectives. I think those new individuals suffer through that. So I think that's a really important call out that Jeff made and couldn't agree more. I think, sure, like digital, virtual, like it's here to stay. I mean, you know, other than, you know, figuring out the glitches we all have from day to day, even 18 months into a pandemic, you know, we're going to be able to continue to be productive and avoid a few commutes here and there, which I think is all awesome. And I think, you know, legitimately from a productivity perspective, I believe, and a lot of the data would suggest this. I know it's like, you know, spikes and then wanes a bit over time, but I believe in terms of doing the tasks, the productivity is there, right? Like I think that's fundamentally true. The big but, you know, as Jeff was alluding to, is the less tangible thing. So two things to note there. You know, one is innovation. I mean, all of us on the screen here and probably everybody in the audience are living in much more complex environments, you know, variability, uncertainty, complexity, all this stuff, and very complex challenges that require cross-functional, integrated, diverse perspectives to solve, right? And, you know, virtual lives allow us to live a little bit more in our silos within a sales silo, a finance silo, or marketing silo. To solve these big challenges, we need everybody together in a room to talk. So I think that's one thing that probably suffers. The second piece, kind of what Jeff was saying as well, is culture. Not just for new employees, but if I think about all of us, hopefully, are trying to put our best foot forward around diversity, equity, and inclusion right now, and making a much more inclusive workplace, et cetera. And you know, other cultural initiatives that we're trying to strive to, you know, to advance our cause. And these types of things are, I find, really difficult to create meaningful advances on through the tiles, as Jeff put it. So, you know, I think we're there on a productivity perspective. I don't think we're there from an innovation and a culture perspective. So we ended up going to a hybrid route, which maybe is kind of like being half pregnant. I don't know, but you know, the reality is people do like the flexibility of working from home and having a little bit of ability to manage their home and work life. But you know, 3 days a week, we will absolutely be in the office for all the reasons I stated. And I guess the reality is, locally and globally, we will probably lose some good talent along the way because of that decision. But it's a price we're willing to bear for, you know, what we need to accomplish as an organization going forward.
No, thanks for that, James. And I'm thinking about, you know, even just yesterday when I was in the office for the first day of our AGM, I mean, I was able to talk to a colleague and we quickly ran through 3 issues in 10 minutes. That saved me 3 emails to send them later. So you lose that ability to just dynamically kind of talk things through. And instead we kind of get clogged up in boxes and staring at screens all day. But Michelle, I wanted to go to you next. I mean, as a business leader, you know, we've talked about the new normal, but how do we really communicate the new normal and get the buy-in from the staff, especially in an era where we still are uncertain, as Jeff and James said, about what that normal might look like for a particular company?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I'm sure we're all wrestling with it a little bit, and because we really don't know when the pandemic will be over. I think fundamentally for me, it's about agility and flexibility as we learn how to live with this virus, and evolve our work. And so we've said that you know, we've heard a bit about communication, and this has been absolutely true for us as well throughout the response and the recovery. We've really focused on that clear, transparent, and frequent communication. And we're really continuing that going forward. So that's been a really good thing, I think. We're sharing updates We were sharing updates on the public health guidelines and the government requirements locally, and then our updated policies and protocols. But now we're also leveraging that to share our business updates and talk about what's going on in the organization. So that's been good. But I also think we really need to stay flexible as we respond to the changing circumstances. And that's what we're hearing now. The more we learn as we're able to get back into the offices, what are we going to do going forward? And so we are currently looking at the future of flexibility at Enbridge. I think another challenge that flexibility means something different to everyone. And so rather than just coming up with a policy, we've decided to hear from employees. What does flexibility mean to them, and what do they value about it most? And so we've done some surveys and focus groups. And then based on that feedback, we're expecting to have a new program by the end of the year.
No, thanks, Michelle. And then certainly the flexibility point, if we think about when we thought we were going to get to the new normal again, we all thought we were going to be back in April 2020. That then became the summer, the winter, multiple return to office plans for multiple organizations just keep getting pushed back and back. So yeah, flexibility, absolutely the name of the game.
I'll just share a little story. When I asked someone to lead the recovery team for our organization, I shared, it might be about 6 months. And this is a year and a half later, so I agreed.
Tina, why don't we sort of put that question to you about communicating? I know this is something that you and I had a lot of really good chats about over the course of the year, and I think you have some really interesting insights again, given that you were that essential business that's been open since day one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think what really worked for us, and it sounds like James and Jeff also, was that this CEO had to really come out and speak from the heart, and it had to be what worked for us was that it was led from the top. We found that when messages were delegated to another group, like HR, for example, then some of the recommendations would come into a little bit more question. I think it's okay, first of all, like Jeff said, to acknowledge what you don't know, but also firmly state the company's position on what you would like to see happen. I thought there was a lot of reservedness in terms, around masks and vaccines. And I thought what was helpful for us to get everybody on board was say, this is what I'd like to see in our business happen. And that just helps fill a vacuum of information that people are very hungry for at a critical moment. And it prevents them from, like, if there's no answer coming from the employer, then they go out to seek other sources, reliable or not, for information that might skew their opinion coming back into the workforce. So getting out a clear message and early was hugely effective for us. And then as an essential business, honestly, I didn't have much choice, but it's something that we came out early, is that we always were even in our offices. And that was hard at the beginning, but we put all the COVID measures that were in the stores into our office and established this momentum and this culture to stay in, operate at our best in person, and keep food on the shelves. That was effectively our role in the early days. And but of course, be respectful for people that had childcare needs. And but we removed the friction in terms of who stays home to work and who comes into work. We had people register to stay home versus register to come in. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, some companies register to come in so that we know how to contact trace you. We set it up so that you register to stay home and then assume everybody else is in, so that everybody feels comfortable that, hey, I've got a quiet spot to work here. So removing those barriers really helped for us.
No, I mean, and I'm a firm believer in the mantra that culture eats strategy, and I think your point about culture, that really, I think, speaks to the importance of that. You can have a great plan, but as you build that culture and the sort of esprit de corps, everything else is going to kind of fall apart much more quickly. So in terms of workplace dynamics, there's a lot of things that employers are juggling, and a lot of the small businesses on the call, I hear from occasionally, they're trying to understand about vaccine mandates, hybrid office models, and we talked about some of these themes already. And so, given again some of the diverse workforces that the folks on the call here, I mean, how are you managing those workplace dynamics through some pretty thorny issues at the moment? And maybe Jeff will go to you first on that one.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. It is indeed a thorny question. It really does confront individual rights with the collective good. And I'm just thinking back in my lifetime, which is now considerable. This is a moral dilemma question, frankly, that ranks right up there, and it has been quite divisive. And we've seen this express itself politically, both in Canada, the United States, and around the world. Let me state right up front that broad vaccination is absolutely the way to go. And we have to commend our governments, the politicians, business leaders, the folks on this call for having pushed hard on this. And we can be proud as Canadians. We got a bit of a slow start out of the gate, but we remember Israel and the United States were way out in front of us in terms of vaccine uptake, and now we're leading the pack, so to speak. We're right up there in the top tier. So that's great. So the question is, what do we do as employers going forward? So the first obligation of employer, and it's where we started this conversation, is the safety and well-being of our people. You heard it from all of the panelists here today. It has to come front and center. So effectively, the first order of business was actually taking people out of the office so that we weren't in a shared space. For us, going back to the office meant that you need to be double vaccinated. There are no visitors, no employees into our offices that do not have both vaccines. Out in the field where social distancing is possible, we're not in that place. We are allowing folks to indicate. I will share with this group that, and I'm sure this is consistent across the workforces being represented by the leaders on this call, that we have among us folks that are strongly in favor of vaccination. That's the very, very large majority. We have some folks that are against. That's the very small minority. And we have a few people that have chosen not to declare. And so that it's a tricky situation right now. You heard all of us opine that we need to get back to the office. It's important on multiple dimensions for the health and vitality of the business going forward. And it's not sustainable to work continuously remotely. We do need to have folks interact with one another physically. So what to do? We are signaling to our employees that we are moving towards a vaccine mandate. We are giving them lots of forewarning. And when we get back to the office in the new year, folks can anticipate that the measures that we take will be along those lines. We haven't yet instituted it because we're just waiting to see how this fourth wave plays out. Fortunately, we see it starting to attenuate. If the new year is looking good, then we will be declarative around that. But it's really, really tricky. I have a lot of empathy for folks that have taken positions. I don't necessarily agree with them, but we've never developed and deployed a vaccine as quickly as we have here. The science and data are clear, but you have to empathize with folks that have reservations, either as a result of their belief system, perhaps as a result of their medical conditions, or other reasons. So the decision is hard. And that's why we're taking our time and ensuring that folks have lots of lead time as we signal our path forward.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Jeff. James, I mean, you're in the spot of having both a Canadian business to run like you do, but of course you have a set of global rules that you're needing to work with as well. So how is that looking like from the J&J Canada perspective?
Yeah, and I'd add a third element there that plays largely into this discussion, which is we are the developer and a distributor of a vaccine, less so in Canada, more so around the world at this stage. But so I think all those things make a lot of sense. I think I'll tell you what happened in the US because their employment law is very different than ours, and there's no notion in the Canadian or Ontario sense of constructive dismissal and mandated severance. They're very clear, and on October 4th, it's in the public domain. They put a hard vaccine mandate in, which led to separation given a reasonable amount of time if people weren't able to comply with the mandate to get doubly vaxxed. So that's cut and dry and pretty straightforward. And philosophically, as an organization that produces and distributes a vaccine, we fundamentally agree with, and that led to that decision. I think where it becomes a little bit trickier in Canada is I alluded to this notion of employment law being trickier in most of the provinces, I think, on this topic, and not a lot of precedent on this topic as well. To Jeff's point, it's a bit unprecedented. So, in Canada, what we've done is taken a little bit of a more measured approach. Probably in the end, because we're not quite there yet, but in the end, getting to a similar spot at the US with a little bit of refinement given our local laws. But at the start, when we opened up our offices, we talked about double vax or attestation around rapid testing. Okay, that's when we weren't quite at the levels we're at now in terms of vaccination. So that was step one. We're very likely going to move into a position where we would drop that rapid testing attestation going forward as we step into kind of 3 days a week into the office in the new year. I guess the remaining question though is I'm not sure that we have the appetite nor is the legal landscape ready for us to go into a hard mandate at all, or at least that's our read on the situation. And so not unlike the federal civil service approach to this, do we contemplate unpaid leaves, which will be a pretty severe motivator for those who are on the fence, so to speak, right? So I think that's likely where we'll land, but the story is not completely written at this stage. I think the only difference, though, is you talked about the nature of our organization. There's two important distinctions here. What I was referring to there is largely our head office employees and visitors to our sites. Our field organization are in hospitals, and actually more than that, they're in operating rooms and procedure rooms every day. It is crystal clear that that is a condition of employment for them. Okay, so we can be much more assertive with that group of population who, frankly, were the first to get vaccinated in our whole employee base anyway, because they knew they had to respect the requirements of the hospitals they were serving. So that's one distinction. And I guess the other is on the other end of the spectrum is our distribution side of things. We, as everybody's aware, and we'll probably talk about this later, the supply chain side of things, particularly distribution, is challenged from a labor perspective right now. And so we have to at least acknowledge that from a business continuity perspective, we can't bring a heavy hammer down yet. We have to recognize what the competitive set is doing. One of our secondary distribution centers is next door to Amazon, and that's a competitive set we're living in. And so we can't make things that are completely out of touch with what the employee base, particularly the casual employee base, not the full-time base, is seeing in the marketplace. So that's another kind of theme that we have to consider on the topic.
Great, thanks for that, James. So Tina, I mean, I know one of the things that you and I had kind of talked about in the past is around vaccination rates as almost a KPI for companies, right? And so again, given your company structure with folks in an office and folks in the front lines, I mean, there are some interesting dynamics that you're having to work through or have worked through. So maybe you could share some of those.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, James, we are all next door to Amazon. We all share those same issues in our warehouse staffing. I feel that your pain. But yeah, I would like to share I fully support vaccine mandates, all for it. But I wanted to share TNT's experience in that we were able to get to a 95% fully vaccinated rate without having a vaccine mandate. And so I never actually had to put one in because I got it so high from the start. And that was from getting out early, like sharing the real information, the real data, being very firm about my expectations for our employees, which was, here's the data. We want you to be vaccinated. I had our HR team help all of our staff who struggled with the booking system, help employees make the reservation for them if that was a hindrance. We put in paid leave during the time people went to get vaccine and when they were recovering from any after effects. That was even before the governments in our provinces put that in. So I was supportive of that. We brought the conversation very much to the main stage and off the water cooler. It was not taboo to ask somebody whether you were vaccinated or not. Like we actually gave away souvenirs, like to have have one here. We gave away souvenirs. This one says, for me, for we, for TNT. For the first 80% of people that got vaccinated. So souvenirs, like really made it a big push. And then lastly, to wrap it up at the end, we started taking away top-up benefits for those who were not vaccinated. So basically, if you tested positive, you would you would be put on leave. You could apply for EI, and then the company would top up. So we would put ourselves in a position where we would top you up, like it's not your fault that you got sick. We top you up, you go away, and you have 100% pay. But if you were not vaccinated, you disqualified yourself from that top-up benefit. And that was enough to get people to get on board and get vaccinated. So we took away a carrot, a piece of protection that people valued. That got us to the 95, and at 95, the remaining folks are mostly cannot because of medical reasons, or they're on long-term leaves. And that was enough for us to get all the way there. And it's been hugely effective. Out of 5,000 staff, we've reported one breakthrough case since June. So masks plus vaccines made it you're at 95% vaccination rate, no vaccine mandate, but heavy communication and social and cultural push got us there. But, I would say that I'm fully supportive of vaccine mandates because, you can only ride the civic, do it for civic duty, do it for your family, do it for yourself. That gets you a few months. But the business costs of having positive cases, the anxiety that it creates staff, it is not worth it. I'm supportive, Jeff, of where you're going on that.
Right. Well, I mean, that's really impressive. I mean, 95%, you've done better than the rest of the country, with that, push. And so I think that speaks to some of those real tactics that actually demonstrably have an impact in the real world. So thanks for that example, Tina. So Michelle, if I can go to you next. I mean, we have, a lot of folks in their audience, chambers aren't just about, providing best practice for business, but also providing an advocacy forum, for companies. And so if we think about the sort of the government angle to all of this, the government's done a lot to, buy vaccines and, provide various public health rules. But, what do you think governments need to do now looking ahead to get businesses ready for the new normal?
I think that this is a great question, and there's a few areas that come to mind for me. And so the first is around the use of technology to run our business is really increased. And so with that comes the potential increase in cyber attacks. And so then if the attacks get through, the consequences can be incredibly debilitating. So for us, you only have to look at what happened with the Colonial Pipeline ransomware attack last April as a prime example. So that attack drove some new TSA regulations in the US, which we're complying with to protect customer and stakeholder privacy and data. And so I think collaboration between businesses, governments, and regulatory agencies is really important, and Canada should consider following a similar kind of approach. A second area is really increased support for the development and deployment of existing and proven innovations. And this can include direct support to companies that want to adopt any innovation solutions that can't in the current economic circumstances. So as an example, to support the energy transition, the City of Toronto is now using our carbon negative renewable natural gas from their waste facilities to fuel their garbage trucks, and we're also piloting a 2% hydrogen blend into a section of our natural gas system in Markham, Ontario to prove out the technical feasibility of hydrogen blending. So examples like that. A third area, working with Indigenous communities to build skills and participate fully in new opportunities to enable active investment in new projects. So programs like the Indigenous Natural Resource Partnerships, Indigenous Skills and Employment Training, and the Strategic Partnerships Initiative, they all play a really important role in enabling those opportunities. And then the last point really is around an industrial growth strategy that includes government, Indigenous, and industry participation to build that cohesive long-term trade policy for Canada that supports energy use, technology, innovation, and environmental and climate stewardship.
Great. Thanks for that, Michelle. And certainly, the cybersecurity point, we hear from businesses across the country about those that have been, hit. And so I think that's definitely a point that speaks to things that the, businesses are dealing with in the real world and the new normal, especially in a digitalized environment. Maybe James, we'll go to you next.
And maybe not a ton to add because great response by Michelle. I guess a couple of things I'd add is number one, consistency. The question invites some constructive feedback to government. So I'll start by saying before I bite on the question, I'll start by saying I think we can all agree objectively based on case counts, based on death rates, based on vaccine rollout of late. The Federation and the provinces did a phenomenal job managing this pandemic, which we were all flying blind for the beginning of it, right? So I think relative to peers on the international stage, a great job. However, always lessons learned from that, and I think the consistency piece is one. We have a great political structure in Canada. I think one of the biggest challenges with it bore itself out through the pandemic, and that is this FPT or federal, provincial, territorial interplay, particularly as it comes to healthcare and public health. And so all of us lived this, when we were deciding what vaccine we were going to get, a Moderna, Pfizer, an AZ, right? I mean, I know I came out of my second shot of AstraZeneca as a proud J&J employee, by the way, but in my second shot of AstraZeneca, and in the parking lot, I turned on the car, and PHAC was saying, don't get a second shot of AstraZeneca, get an mRNA. So, I mean, and I get it, the evidence was evolving, but I mean, things like that created confusion across municipalities, provinces, and the entire country, right? So I think if there's big, hairy issues like this, we have to come together as an FPT kind of organization, so to speak, and tackle these problems more holistically and put the political institutions aside for the sake of consistency of message to citizens. So I think that's kind of a big message. I think the other piece is leadership. We talked a little bit about vaccine mandates and the fact that in Canada anyway, there's really not a lot of precedent to guide particularly small and medium-sized enterprises, on this topic. And I feel for, so I'm sitting in a large multinational organization with lots of legal support, lots of coffers to manage the fact that when we get sued, not if we get sued on some of these topics, right? But if you're a small entrepreneurial, like restaurateur, gym owner, etc., you're at the front end of these discussions just to make a living. And you had to make decisions before any large companies did on what you're going to do about vaccine passports, etc. And I know, slowly but surely, large jurisdictions and the federal government have started putting policies and procedures in place, but they could have done so probably more consistently, a little bit more sooner, and maybe even exercise some legislative authority around some of these topics as well to provide more clarity for businesses going forward. So I think those would be the two big things I'd add.
Well, there's another question I did want to ask everyone around sort of the emerging, supply chain and labor challenges. But we do have a question from the audience that I did want to make sure we had time to get to, and that's around the sort of acceptance and disclosure of personal health information and vaccine mandates, and thought of potentially losing talent. Our members face a whole series of dynamics across the country. There are people that have corporate head offices that are based in large municipalities, and we also have a lot of members where it's either small bank branches in a community, or grocery stores in a community, or Main Street in a small town in a rural setting. So I mean, what are some of the considerations that folks in those small town environments can think of, where maybe these central directions may not find their way down, they may not be implemented consistently in those small settings? I mean, Jeff, I'm thinking, for instance, you have crews that are out in the field, right? Not everyone is at the head office with you. So maybe Jeff, will put it to you first. Like, I mean, how do you sort of manage these things to make sure that it's being applied consistently and fairly in all parts of the business, where it's not under sort of your direct ability to see it day to day?
Yeah, look, this is, and I think Tina referred to this point, you've got to lead from the front here. That's a really good example, particularly in the face, as James indicated, inconsistent information that may be disseminated by various authorities, causing confusion down on the rank and file. That is a situation where, the business leader needs to step forward and say, here's what we know. We're going to err on the side of caution, and we are going to take the following measures, and we are going to apply it consistently. And the principles are clearly articulated, and you're coming forward as an authentic, genuine leader, caring about the folks that work with and for you. And I recognize that takes a certain amount of courage sometimes, because not everyone would see things the way that you do. But ultimately, that engenders a degree of success. Folks feel that you're coming forward with credibility. So that would be my answer to that. It's a little more challenging to put a finer point on it without knowing the specific facts around any given situation. But Tina gave an example in her workplace as to what she did in order to achieve the goals. That's a great example of leaders coming forward and saying, this is what we're going to do as an organization. Here's how we're going to incent you. Here are the consequences if you choose not to follow, right? We have sympathy for you, but we recognize that there could be consequences, and here's how it's going to play out. And then be consistent in the way you apply it.
So Tina, maybe I'll go to you next. I mean, you have locations that are in multiple provinces across the country, and I know you're based in Toronto right now. But how do you manage those dynamics with folks that are so dispersed geographically across such a large space in this country?
Yeah, a couple of sharings. One was to get to what percentage of our population. Early days, we did as simple as like the Survey Monkey survey, like a voluntary survey, like click, are you vaccinated? Are you not vaccinated? You don't have intention to, I do not want to declare. Like that gave us a first indication. That's a free service. The other sort of practical tip that I would give is when someone says, well, I don't want to share because it's private information. And then we would say, well, nobody other than HR knows your vaccination status. I do not know who is vaccinated, who is not. Your colleagues will not know either. We acknowledge it's private information, but we keep it with the other private information we have on you, which is your marital status, your sex, your driver's license, your address. So every company has some security measures for private employee information. It usually is housed in HR. And then we literally added a field, whether it's in an HRIS system or it can be in Excel, that says check for first vaccination, check for second vaccination. We're about to put one in for boosters. And so it can be in Excel, it can be HRIS, but I try to soften the declaration of vaccine status by saying it is housed with private information. Your colleagues will not know unless you share it with them. And we made sharing people's vaccine status a very open, happy thing. We put up this humongous 6-foot apple tree and gave everybody an apple, and then said, take a selfie when you go get your shot, and then stick it on the apple, and then stick the apple on the tree, and let's go fill this big apple tree with faces. So people self-declared, like proudly, I got the jab. I'm going to put my face on the wall. Like it was fun like that. We made a big transition that way.
Hopefully they were green Granny Smith apples though, as opposed to red delicious, but that's just a personal preference more than anything else. So we have about 3 minutes left, and what I want to do is a really quick lightning round through all four of you, just to say really quickly, we've had a number of supply chain challenges that businesses are facing, whether it's labor shortages, the cost of a marine cargo container, coming to Canada, the availability of cargo containers. So if you could maybe say sort of one challenge you're facing and whether or not you think it's going to be something that's going to be durable or whether it's a temporary blip, because a lot of these have been caused or at least aggravated by COVID-19. So maybe Michelle, we'll go to you first, and then we'll go to Jeff, James, and Tina.
So mine will be very brief. It's 2 words: predictability and precision, I think, are the biggest challenge for us. So it's hard to see where all of the impacts might be because they tend to be sort of upstream from the direct equipment and materials we're buying. So that's what we're seeing carrying into 2020.
Okay, great. Thanks, Michelle. Jeff, over to you.
So yes to challenges around supply chain in our business, and will it abate? The answer is yes, but not as quickly as folks think it might. It's going to take a bit of time. And our labor constraint, on the other hand, is very real, and we anticipate that will go on for quite a while. There may actually not be a solution to it that allows us to find the appropriate bodies.
Thanks, Jeff. James.
Yeah, good question. I mean, a lot of us, a lot of the industries represented on the call today have sought hyper efficiencies through supply chain management over the last decade, right? So that's been a trend largely through globally integrated supply chains. And we just have in the last 18 months seen the impact of that. So in the short to medium term, I agree absolutely with Jeff that we're going to have to unwind probably some of those efficiencies to make sure we meet customer demands. Otherwise, we're going to be particularly in every industry, leaving people short. Look no further than large appliances and cars today, right? And so I guess in the long term, I like to think that we'll be able to regain some of those efficiencies. However, what does the next pandemic look like? Don't know. What does climate change look like? You know, a lot of our supply chain is in Puerto Rico where hurricanes hit. And what does, socio-political unrest look like as well in the future? I mean, a lot of things have to go right for that supply chain efficiency to bear itself out in the long run. So there's another topic for another day.
If only we had one more hour. But Tina, I'll give the last word to you.
Thank you. I'll speak directly to the, especially the Asia routes for supply chain issue. It is tight. It is tight like never before. We're the largest Asian food importer into Canada, and I'm burning bad from it. A container that used to cost $3,000 to ship, it's now $9,000. If you want refrigerated, it can be up to $25,000. That used to be $5,000. So those are real price increases that are coming only from ships. There's no problem of product coming out of the factory. The problems comes out from the factory to the ship and booking that spot on the container to put it on the water. Because of that constraint, you should also, we are experiencing 4 to 8 week product delays. A bit of a story for you, like our buyers used to come in every morning. The first thing they would open up on their computer is sales. How was sales yesterday? Now they don't care about that. The first thing they open up is inventory. Did my inventory make it on the ship yesterday? And we expect that to persist. Agree with you, Jeff. It's longer than I anticipated. I was hoping that would end by the end of 2021. Now recently I said till mid 2022, and now I think it's going to last till the end of 2022. So, this Christmas, we put in our orders in July, and this Christmas, whoever has inventory is going to win. If you don't have product on the shelf, like you're really done. You're done in the water. So the advice that I'd pass on is order early. Very long lead time plannings is what will help save the day into 2022. And we have to take on like those are real price increases coming in. They will pass on to retailers. They will pass on to customers as well. So those are very real and persistent impacts on supply chain that will last through 2022.
Well, I will say, Tina, I was quite surprised when a couple weeks ago someone said to me, "You need to start doing your Christmas shopping for your kids now, Mark." And I was like,
yeah.
"Really? I mean, we're not even at Halloween yet, and I'm thinking about Christmas presents."
Oh, sure, absolutely. I'm already done.
Already done. All right, you're a better parent than me, probably.
Halloween costumes bought 2 months ago. If you see something you like on the shelf, any shelf, buy it now. I bought my snowshoes in August because I knew bike sales, like you would guess, like bicycles. This is another story. Like bicycles, would you guess in a pandemic, are bicycle sales up, down, or flat? Bicycles. Up. You would guess up. Yes, James, you'd guess up. Bicycle sales were down by 10% in Canada because of lack of supply. Simply because they had lack of supply, lack of parts, they couldn't build them fast enough, supply chain delays, and then all the bikes are showing up like in October. Like there's no point for that. So every retailer is battling this to the point where the largest retailers are chartering ships. That's unprecedented in the retail world. So and even if you're not a retailer, this is happening to your packaging. This is happening to your parts that goes into your products too. So that early planning, take on those price increases, and because the spending power, there's still some spending power out there. You know, the demand is there because travel is not all the way back yet.
Well, with that, I'd like to thank Michelle, Jeff, James, and Tina for your contributions, not just to the AGM today, but what you've done more broadly for the Chamber Network. On behalf of our members, thank you for all of that and for the insights you're able to share today. And I'd like to give a special acknowledgement as well to one of our conference sponsors, CN. Cyrus unfortunately wasn't able to reconnect, but you know, as a company that does keep the goods moving across the country, whether it's from Prince Rupert to Halifax or from Chicago to New Orleans, you know, over a $250 billion, I believe, is the number of goods that are shipped. You know, so thank you, Cyrus, to you and the CN team for your support of the Chamber Network and keeping the economy moving during the pandemic.